I said I wanted to branch out on my channel eventually, and well, the time has arrived. In this video, I'm going to list the 10 most overrated movies of all time. You may care, you may not care, but you will watch, I hope. Please? Number 10, Scarface. Scarface is one of the funniest movies I've ever seen.
Manny, look at this pelican fly. Come on, pelican.
But therein lies the issue. It's not supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be brutal and depict the rise and fall of an immigrant in the drug-dealing business of 1980s Miami. But Al Pacino's over-the-top accent and mannerisms make it impossible to take anything Tony Montana does seriously. As the movie progresses and Tony spirals more and more out of control, it becomes a parody of the movie it was originally trying to be. For whatever reason, the movie has had a massive influence in the hip-hop industry, which has helped it to remain relevant long after it should be. Number 9, Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Empire is generally considered by many to be the quote-unquote best Star Wars film, and while it is an objectively good film, I've never understood all the praise it gets. It has a great opening on Hoth and a thrilling ending on Bespin, where Vader famously reveals to Luke that he once had unprotected sex with Luke's mom. No! But the main body of the film is just, well, it's boring. Luke spends most of the time doing really nothing on Dagobah with Yoda, while the rest of the protagonists hide in the Millennium Falcon and barely escape a giant slug. To sum it all up, The Empire Strikes Back is the movie equivalent of 2 hamburger buns with no burger in the middle. Number 8, Avatar. I almost didn't put this on here since it's become in vogue to say that Avatar is overrated, but then I remind myself that this piece of crap somehow grossed nearly $3 billion. Ow! I saw it once in theaters way back in 2009 when it came out, and I don't even really remember what it was about. Did James Cameron mindfuck us all? From what I do recall, it was a solid action film with some cool moments, but is it worthy of being the highest grossing movie ever? No. In fact, my lasting memory of it is when Sully, the main character who is in a wheelchair, uses his avatar to do the sex with Zoe Saldana's character. It was an extremely uncomfortable silence in the movie theater. Jim Cameron, you naughty dog. Number 7, Titanic. Let's stay on the James Cameron train, or ship in this instance. Titanic starts out with an old woman named Rose who survived the ill-fated voyage. She begins to reminisce about her trip on the voyage in 1912. She was born into wealth and engaged to a guy she didn't like, so in typical female fashion, she immediately fell in love with the first guy she ran into on the ship, a poor artist named Jack, played by Leonardo DiCaprio. The two become inseparable and eventually perform steamy premarital coitus. Honestly, DiCaprio having sex with a barely legal teenager is the most realistic part of the movie. Anyway, the movie made bank, despite everybody knowing how it would end, and the love story being as generic as possible. Also, I can't move on without mentioning that I firmly believe Rose had enough room on the door at the end for Jack so both of them could live, but she was a selfish bitch and let Jack die of hypothermia. Number 6, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I've never read any of the Lord of the Rings books, but I've tried about 3 different times in my life to get into the movies to see what the hype was about, and while the fight scenes and battles are nice and the cinematography's great, I still found myself nodding off to sleep at times during these 2.5 hour to 3 hour movies. There's just so much filler walking around. There's hobbits, there's orcs, there's elves and wizards, which sounds cool, but most of the time I'm just left scratching my head at what was going on. The only thing that made sense to me was Sean Bean's character dying almost immediately after he was introduced. My biggest gripe, though, is the lack of a great villain. Sauron is the big baddie and talked up to be so evil, but he's just a floating eye in the sky. Seriously, I'm sorry, but a floating eye doesn't do it for me. I need a villain to be flesh and blood, or at least humanoid or something like it. Maybe Lord of the Rings is above my intelligence level and I'm too dumb to understand its genius, or maybe Lord of the Rings fans just have crappy taste. Either way, if you suffer from insomnia, watch one of these films and you'll be asleep in no time. Number 5, Mad Max Fury Road. There's no debating that Fury Road is a visually stunning film, which leads to people overrating the actual plot and character development. First off, Tom Hardy's Max character, we really never learned much about him. He's just kinda there, which is a waste of Hardy's talents as an actor. We aren't really given any reason to be invested in him besides the fact that he's the title character. But it's not just him, we're really not given any incentive to be invested in any other character, really. Charlize Theron's one-arm character looks cool, but again, we don't really care about her, outside of the fact that she looks looks cool. The only somewhat interesting character is Immortan Joe. If they had spent more time explaining his backstory, now he rose to power, this movie might have actually been worth the hype. But Joe is underutilized, and instead more attention is given to his 5 quote-unquote wives that are annoying and also really serve no purpose other than to look pretty and be pregnant. Overall, this movie was way more style than substance. It looks pretty, but in the end doesn't really offer much. Just like Instagram models, no offense.
What a lovely day!
Number 4, The Shining. A family spends all winter stuck in a haunted hotel. The head of the family, a well-known writer played by Jack Nicholson, slowly descends into madness while trying to complete his next novel. By the end of the movie, he is so far gone he's trying to kill his extremely unattractive wife and his son. That's The Shining in a nutshell. Like many other entries in this video, the biggest reason it's on here is because it's boring. Psychological thrillers have never been my cup of tea, so maybe that's why I don't revere this movie like so many others do. Even the famous "Here's Johnny" scene at the end felt a little forced and out of place.
Here's Johnny!
The only time this film really felt like a horror film was when the twin girls that the son keeps running into on his big wheels are shown in one of the son's visions to have been brutally murdered by their father with an axe. I suppose the movie would be scary to me if I was ever dumb enough to trap myself in a haunted hotel for an entire winter, but that's never going to happen, probably. Number 3, Top Gun Maverick, the most recent entry on the list. I had extremely high expectations going into this movie based on all the reviews and people I knew gassing it up. Instead, what I saw was a movie that had incredible fight scenes and the most generic plot imaginable. Was it a bad movie? No, but I couldn't believe how many people seemingly just overlooked how cookie cutter the plot is because the fight scenes were awesome. Tom Cruise's best friend, who died in the first movie, had a son, played by Miles Teller in this film, who just so happens to be one of the pilots Cruise is training for a super secret top mission. And the son has a vendetta against Cruise because he thinks he got his dad killed, but wow, you will not believe this. At the very end of the film, the two end up working together to successfully complete their supposedly impossible mission and become best friends. Oh yeah, one of the subplots of the film is Cruise porking Jennifer Connelly, who plays a single mom that somehow has enough money to own a dive bar and a yacht. Her character wasn't in the original movie, but they had to find a new MILF for Cruise to copulate with because the actress who played his female love interest in the original film aged so badly in real life.
I don't ever want to see it again! Ever!
Seriously, don't Google. It's a tough scene. The movie was a big hit with the MAGA crowd because it's about America blowing up enemies and shit, but in reality, it's simply a good film that falls well short of its hype. Number 2, Rosemary's Baby. This movie is held in such high esteem, and I will never understand why. Most of the films on this list, despite being overrated, are still objectively good and watchable film, but Rosemary's Baby is both overrated and terrible. The story follows the troubled pregnancy of a woman named Rosemary, who, as the movie progresses, becomes more and more isolated in a haunted apartment, go figure, as her neighbors all secretly belong to a satanic cult. Wow, that stinks. The long and short of it is, Rosemary gets sexually assaulted and impregnated by Satan one night, although the scene is filmed to look like a dream, so we, as an audience, aren't 100% sure if it was real or not. But, as you can guess, it actually happened. At the very end of the film, she has Satan's baby, but we don't ever see the baby, and the entire film just feels like a giant waste of time. It makes even less sense if you try and find out what could happen next. Since we learn the baby has Satan's eyes, it's obviously really horrific looking. So how exactly is this cult gonna hide a baby that looks like Satan as it grows up? Are they just gonna keep it in the apartment its entire life? Does it have any powers? Is it half human? We don't know. It's all so dumb. And oh yeah, the director of this film, famous pedophile and fugitive Roman Polanski. Hey Roman, your movie sucked ass and so do you. And number 1, The Blair Witch Project. Finally, we get to the most overrated movie of all time, The Blair Witch Project. I'm gonna be honest, I will judge you and think worse of you if this film scared you in any way. The story is centered around a couple of young filmmakers going into the woods where a powerful evil witch supposedly lives. This was really the first movie to use the found footage camera technique to give it a quote-unquote more real feeling. The movie also got hyped up in the late 90s and early 2000s because the actors had disappeared and it was promoted as a true story. In reality, the actors were paid to lay low for a while, as literally any person with a single brain cell could have deducted. The movie is literally just 3 morons running around with a camera and freaking out at every little thing they hear. It's so awful. The big scare at the very end, or at least what's supposed to be the big scare, is one of the crew members standing in the corner of a house. This is quote-unquote scary because the quote-unquote witch supposedly made a guy in the 1940s kill 7 children in this same house while letting one kid survive. The one surviving kid was forced to face the wall so he wouldn't see the carnage. After the girl sees her friend standing in the corner, the camera falls and she screams and it fades to black. We are left to assume that the witch killed her, but we never see a witch because there never was a witch, because supernatural mind-controlling witches aren't fucking real.
Correct!
Not only is this movie horrible, it also gave inspiration to other horrible found footage horror franchises like Paranormal Activity. If you think this film is good, you almost certainly eat crayons.